This review video is going to be the next one in our series, and it's going to be dealing with the western expansion and moving out into the west between the mining towns, the farming that's taking place there, and the legislation that's going to bring people out there. And then lastly, it's going to deal with the Indian Wars. The first piece of this puzzle is going to really have to deal with the California gold rush, and this is going to be one of the first things that really starts to bring a large number of people out to the west and ultimately through the rest of the country to get to California specifically. And that's going to be one of the driving factors for the migration of peoples now into these areas. So we're taking a little bit of a step back in time here, and gold was first discovered at a place called Sutter's Mill in 1848 out in California. Once this news kind of gets out, you're going to essentially have a large number of people kind of quitting their jobs and rushing to California from all over the United States, and not even really just the United States. This was a worldwide rush as well in certain cases, and you're going to get people from Europe, from China, Australia, South America, really all flocking to this area at the prospect of getting rich and getting rich quick, with this prospect of finding gold potentially. So in the year 1849, you have more than 80,000 people making this trip to California, and these men and women that make this trip are going to become known as 49ers, which makes a lot of sense when you think that the football team in San Francisco today is actually called the 49ers. This is actually what they are referring to. So San Francisco had been a pretty small town, before this, and just very rapidly you're going to get a small town turning into a much larger city that's going to have a lot of traffic through it. And by 1860, you're going to have the population of California swelling to almost 300,000 And when it comes down to it, really very few people are actually going to strike it rich, but the prospect of it is going to really drive so many people there. The example I used in class is that if you had a potential 1% or even maybe a little more in certain cases chance of getting everything you wanted monetarily anyway, if you were to kind of give everything up and to leave to go somewhere, would you take that risk? And that's kind of the deal that was going on here. You had tons of people flocking to the spot in hopes that they were going to hit it big, and women also joined this rush. They weren't necessarily in the mining camps, but when it comes down to it, they took advantage of some of the economic opportunities that presented themselves. In particular, they opened up businesses, things like boarding houses, laundries, sewing, tailors, and bakeries, and things like this, restaurants. Women aren't the only ones doing this. Obviously, some men are opening up these style of businesses as well. But when it comes down to it, some people also went broke trying to make their fortunes. Between spending money trying to open up, a business, or getting into the fields and eventually wasting and whittling through your savings and the amount of money that you had trying to find gold. And when it comes down to it, these people who kind of bust in this part of this, when you bust, you're looking to make a living elsewhere, and a lot of these people that come to these mining booms, they end up either going on to the next one, or they kind of stay in the same spot and take up things like farming that are going to be able to be fruitful for them and to get by. This is a little bit of a recap from before the Civil War, but this gold rush really brings about big changes to California. When you start getting a large number of population moving in, into these mining camps, you're going to get crime and things like that. And when you start getting crime and this large number of people, that natural progression kind of deals with government. So in 1849, you have the state, deciding whether or not it was going to come in. So the people, they came together and they decided to form a state constitution, requesting to join the country, joining the U.S. or not. And if you remember, this is one of the big compromises and one of the big things that goes on before the Civil War, and California eventually comes into the state into the country as a free state, and this causes a big controversy at the national level. And what happens is, as you get all of these different people coming from all over the place, Hawaii, China, Peru, Chile, France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, Australia, as I have listed here, this you get a much more diverse population, and you have a lot of people coming from Hispanic countries, in particular, South America and such, and even Mexico, being as California borders Mexico. And what happens is this diversity is embraced a bit. You actually have the state constitutions written in Spanish and English, and these Spanish people that were here before this Great Migration, or these Mexican people, I should say, they owned this land, and they had owned this land for a long time. If you remember, this was part of the Spanish borderlands, during the colonizational period. These people had been here for a long time, and this now migration of a white population in particular is going to kind of start to pull this land from these people. Mexicans weren't the only ones that were going to be driven off of their lands. You have Native Americans, they get kicked off and their lands, and when it comes down to it, they have trouble earning a living. You have large number of natives kind of dying of starvation and diseases and things like that after they're kicked out of their lands for mining purposes and for the whites that are coming in. And it's an ugly sight, of course, as well, as usual with this story. So you also have the Chinese. Another part of this diversity are the Chinese, and they are attracted by the gold just as much as everybody else. And they come over across the Pacific Ocean, and initially they are kind of welcomed by the state of California and the people here, as population wasn't very large to begin with. They were seen as laborers and necessary. But as you get more and more people here, and more Chinese in particular, you're going to get a series of prejudices that are building, of course, among the population here against the Chinese workers. And these Chinese workers are going to become a major factor in the history of this country. In particular, one is the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. This group of people is going to really be a major factor in that, and without their sacrifices and blood, sweat, and tears, and kind of this wouldn't have gotten done as quickly as it did, especially out west, where some of the dangers were a lot more than going through the plains. And then the last part of diversity, this is after the war. You have a lot of free black men and such coming out to California. California is going to have the richest African American population of any state, but they do really kind of still face some of the discrimination that you would see elsewhere in the country. I'll run through a couple pictures of this time period and different things as well. So this is just a picture of a miner. Looks like he's panning for gold. You can see where I'm circling with my mouse here. Just kind of show you the conditions and what this kind of looked like. This is actually a picture of San Francisco in the late 1800s. You can see all of the tall sailing ships here that would probably be used going back and forth from Asia, bringing some of these migrants into the area, but also moving around, moving goods and services and things around as well. But it's just a cool picture from the late 1800s here. This is a picture of a mining operation. You can see the engineering behind it and the diversion of the water that they would ultimately probably be using to pan out the gold. So this is kind of an advertisement. I like to think of it kind of as one of those TV commercials you see, for moving to a particular state, or coming to a particular state for tourism or something like that. This is an advertisement for taking a clipper ship, which are those ships that you saw in that picture of San Francisco, those tall sailing ships, kind of taking one of those to get to California. And this is just a picture of some of the difficulties that some of these people might have seen. You have a mining encampment kind of here being attacked by the natives before encroaching on their land. This is a picture of the Chinese in the mining fields, and mining camps, basically looking and figuring out and looking for gold. This is another one of those kind of, I almost want to say propaganda, if you will, of a kind of a romantic view of this mining operations out west, out in California. This could be seen anywhere in the country. This might influence someone to move to this area to try to take advantage of this and try to try their luck at striking it rich. This is just another one of those mining operations that I thought just was an interesting picture that you guys can take a look at. And then this is probably a little bit more of a real kind of view of some of these mining camps. You have these people, it looks like in certain cases they're kind of ankle deep in some mud and such in these mining camps. Just kind of shows some of the harsher realities in that kind of romantic view that I just kind of showed you a second ago in that
This
image.
now brings us away from California and kind of into mining and the boom towns associated with it in the first place. So what happens is once this gold kind of starts to dissipate in California and it's not as easy to find, you actually have people looking elsewhere for gold, and you actually get some other areas of the country that are also very prominent, with having gold, and you're going to get these discoveries, and it's going to lead to people heading there very rapidly.
So this is a map that kind of shows the hot spots for mining, whether it's gold or silver, which you're going to get as well. You're going to get some silver rushes. The initial gold strikes are kind of out in the Sierra Nevadas and the eastern border of California and Nevada, but you also get these other hotspots in Utah, and Colorado is going to be the next big one. You have some more in the northern Rockies as well, in Idaho. You have it in the Badlands in South Dakota, which is going to become really important for the Native American story in the Black Hills, which we'll get to eventually. So there was kind of a general pattern of these boom towns, that once you had gold that was kind of discovered, the news spreads pretty rapidly, and you're going to get a large influx of people, and when you do, these people are going to need accommodations, so you actually get these mining cities popping up very quickly, and you kind of have a pattern. You have this discovery of gold, you're going to have people then flooding to the spot more or less. Once you have a large number of people there, you're going to get this kind of quicker construction of the city for these accommodations I was just talking about, and then over a long enough period of time, you're actually going to have the gold start to disappear, right? People are going to have discovered the gold that's available in the area. They're going to start mining it, and the easier to find gold is going to be, gone, really. So once, this starts to peter out, you're going to have people leaving. They're going to be looking for opportunity elsewhere, and if the mining operation completely goes bust, you're going to kind of leave behind these cities that were really only there to take advantage of the natural resources in the area. So if the natural resources are gone, there's no use in actually being in these cities really anymore, and that kind of leaves behind what becomes known as ghost towns. As I just mentioned before, once this California gold runs low, and you saw on this map, you're going to get these new communities between 1858 or so and 1880, between the Sierra Nevadas and the Rockies and the Black Hills, for these mining communities. As a result, you're going to get new territories in the United States, from Colorado, Arizona, Idaho, Montana,
Well, very
Wyoming,
similarly,
you're going to get people just pretty much overnight dropping everything that they have, heading west in search of gold. A lot of times these people would go with their families, on these trails that were out west. You have this picture here on the side, if you can read it. It says, organize, Pikes Peak or bust. So when you get discovery of gold in Colorado, you have a very similar migration, and you have this piece of this report known as the Sherman Report that basically shares that you had about 25,000 people leaving, to go from mine to mine in certain cases before, in some cases, there was even really any reliable news. It just kind of goes to show the importance of getting there quick. If people just, they hear the news and they head out right away, hoping that they're going to be one of the first ones there to take advantage of
As
the
I mentioned,
before, gold isn't really the only way to get rich in these particular boom areas. You're going to have other people taking advantage of opportunities that they can find themselves. And one of these people, known as William Larimer, he is going to be one of the first to arrive in the Denver area, and he is going to kind of claim a large number of these chunks of land, and he's actually going to be laying out the city and selling the land to the influx of settlers for the gold that they're finding. And this city and this layout is actually going to become the city of Denver. So, this initial gold, as we were kind of talking about, is the easy gold. Your average person might be able to find it. The ones that are lucky are maybe making $50 to $100 a day, which back then is a whole lot of money. But in the long run, once this gold kind of disappears, it's a lot harder to get, find this gold because the easy stuff's been found. You have large mining companies, with machinery and the resources that can really take advantage of it, and these are the only people at that point that are going to be really making a serious killing out here. The booms in Colorado, especially at Pikes Peak, many of these people who bust are going to head over to Nevada, where you have the discovery of gold was actually mixed with a bluish kind of substance, which they found and realized was actually silver. So you actually get some what's known as silver rushes as well into these areas, and one particular area became known as Virginia City, Nevada. So you have some people, as I was saying before, that are kind of prominent and important out in this particular area. One of these people's name was Henry Comstock, and he was able to get there first and kind of claim a lot of this silver-rich property, and he would break it into sections and kind of sell these plots to individuals or companies that were looking to ultimately get in there to mine. You have other people, one in particular named John W. McKay, who manages to kind of create new techniques and new machinery, really, to extract a lot more from these mines. And these mines, in many cases, they thought were just dry and were done. And with these new techniques and all of these people in these particular areas, you have a quote here from Mark Twain that I think sums it up a bit nicely. He has this: right, money was as plenty as dust. Newly rich citizens built showy houses where everything seemed to be silver-plated, and one man had even silver shoes made for his horses. This kind of just goes to show, the money that certain people who never had it in certain cases are what they're doing with it, and that this is now a major influx into the economy of this money. And the last kind of thing about the mining that we're going to talk about anyway briefly is this communities. These communities, they weren't necessarily in parts that were officially recognized as parts of the United States yet, right? They were just territories, so a lot of the time, they weren't necessarily under the jurisdiction yet. So as a result, these mining towns, they had laws. They needed laws, about size of towns, of staking, who would lay claim to the certain areas, defenses of the town and the mining, around the town. And as a result, you're going to get people that are hired, to deal with the security of these things. You're going to also get a number of outlaws that are dealing, in these areas as well. You have some famous outlaws, things like Jesse James and Buffalo Bill, and you're going to have this kind of period, but that's not necessarily what you see in the movies. A lot of the times in the movies you hear about the Wild West and how crazy it was, and yes, some of this stuff was happening, but I think that's the movies you can understand are just a bit of an exaggeration when it really comes down to it. But you do have some of these towns kind of resulting to what becomes known as vigilante justice. Similarly to Batman, right? They take the law into their own hands when there's nothing that's officially helping them, or not able to help them very easily. Remember, many of these towns really only had like a sheriff and a deputy. The sheriff a lot of times was actually a hired lawman by the people to help them. But if these weren't necessarily being effective, the people could often take things into their own hands. So the ultimate significance of all of this is that the mining really helps to open up the country more than it ever had been. These boom towns, you're going to be getting these towns now and areas of settlement between, the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada Mountains out west, on the border of California and Nevada. You're going to have a kind of an abundance of wealth that's going to, now have an influx into the economy, and, it's going to open up the West for future mining endeavors as well, which is also really important. But the biggest one of the biggest ones anyway, is the railroad, right? With all these new people and new settlements out west, the railroads are going to be taking advantage of it. And, you have this expansion out west. You're going to be getting the Transcontinental Railroad, which is completed in 1868. And with now this movement of peoples, you're also going to get a forcing of the Native American conflict, right? A lot of the times, which you're going to see a bit later when we talk about it, is you have these Native Americans throughout the course of American history, that they were just been pushed farther and farther west. So as we run out of land that we can just push them west into, it's going to start to run into a lot more problems with the Native Americans and kind of end itself in one last major kind of conflict, which leads to the Indian Wars that you're going to see in the late 1800s, kind of resolving it all once and for all, for better or for worse. And then lastly, you are going to get the people that ultimately come to these boom towns and boom areas. They are going to stay. They're going to kind of work these lands once they bust out. A lot of times these lands are actually fairly fertile, and you're going to have farms, and you're going to have demands for meat and things like that, which actually starts the cattle business, which is going to be our next area of discussion. So the cattle kingdom is another area of opportunity for people out west to make a living. And this is going to be what you associate with your cowboys out west. When it comes down to it, the cattle country and the mining that was going on, you're going to lead to a mostly male-dominated society. But there were women out west, of course, too. And these women, a lot of the times, were kind of jack of all trades, as I kind of explain them. They operate in many roles. A lot of times they're working on these farms. They might be kind of ranching as well. Obviously, if they're parents, that's a big deal. They have their kids to worry about, and it's not like you necessarily have schools out here. So, they're acting as teachers for their kids as well. So these women are pretty serious people out west, and so much so that in the Wyoming territory, women are actually given the right to vote as early as 1869, which is obviously a good deal ahead of women's suffrage, at least universally across the country. So you're going to get the rise of this cattle industry. These cattlemen out west, in particular in Texas, you're going to get the raising of livestock, numbering in the thousands. Basically, what's happening is you have these buffalo herds that are essentially being killed off, which we're going to get to in a bit with the Native Americans. But that gap from these lack of buffalo is going to be kind of filled by the cow, and what happens is you have these thousands of what are known as Texas Longhorn cows that are in Texas, and there's demand for meat up north. So what happens is people realize that if they work together, they can basically herd these cattle up north toward the railroad lines and take advantage of this. So a cow that might sell for maybe $4 a head in Texas, where the demand is higher up north, along the railroad lines, you might actually get like $40 a head. And when you get that, $40 per head, if you're able to, herd 1,000 or more cows up north, 40 times that many is going to lead to a lot of money for these people, and it becomes very lucrative. And this Texas Longhorn is where you get the college mascot, the Texas Longhorn. It comes from, these are dangerous animals. They have these long horns that can obviously gore you if you're not careful and you make them angry.
these people and were had to manage these animals on horses. So ultimately, how are you going to keep all of these cows together? A lot of times you have groups of cowboys. You have groups of these people working together, 15 to 20 of them or more in certain cases, who are communicating, working together, kind of keeping the cattle in place. It's pretty loud moving these people. They're using hand signals and gestures and things like that. And ultimately, they round up these cattle. They keep them in line. They move them. They keep driving them farther and farther north. And sometimes the cattle drive could take anywhere from 2 to 4 months. It's a long, push up north, and you have a lot of dangers that come with it, right? You've got Indian raids that are people just not happy. The natives are not happy with people moving through their areas. If the cows get out of control, you can get stampedes. If you're not careful, you could be gored by the animal, using their horns. You have just weather problems out west, right? Especially in the summer. You have these big thunderstorms popping up that could have tornadoes and things like that if you're not careful. And when it comes down to it, they get to the end of the line. They get to the railroad lines where you have these what's known as cow towns. They deliver their cattle. They take the money that they've earned from selling all those cows. The cows then get kind of put onto these cattle cars and shipped out east or west where the demand is going to be even more for this meat. And they take their earnings and they head off to town, and they go into these saloons and other boarding houses and places, and they spend their money. They spend it gambling away their earnings. They drink. Some cases you have prostitution and things that these cowboys are taking advantage of, and when it comes down to it, these towns were a booming business area because of the influx of money from this. And as I said, they're mostly along these railroad lines. And that's what you can see on this map. You have the different routes that these herders usually took up north. You're going to have different railroad lines. Originally, you only have the one by the Union Pacific here, which you have some major cow towns of Cheyenne and Ogallala. When you get the advent of the Kansas Pacific Railroad, you're going to get Abilene and Kansas City and Ellsworth, and you're going to continue to get these other growth of more railroads that are going to be able to be these stops as well. But these are the towns that we're talking about that become these cow towns. So there's kind of a romantic view of these cowboys, and a lot of the success that these people were having is going to kind of really lead to a major increase in the number of people that are attempting to do this. So with the large number of people that are now trying to take their hand into this business, and then a mix of some harsh winters and things that wipe out a lot of the animals that are possible of doing this, you're going to run into problems. You're going to run into less cattle, and people aren't going to be able to make as much of a profit from the amount of stock that they're actually able to push north. So you're going to kind of get a different view and philosophy of how to do this now. You're going to now get people that are owning land, up along this route. You're going to get people owning land, and deciding what they're going to do with it is they're going to kind of ranch on it. They're going to develop this kind of whole new method. So instead of, taking all these animals from down south, you're just going to kind of raise these cattle in these fenced-in areas that become known as ranches. You're going to feed, you're going to water them, you're going to feed them enough that you're going to fatten them up. You're actually going to have specialization in breeding and how to feed these animals to make them the biggest possible to get the most out of them. So that transition is obviously really huge for kind of having the end of this open range of how people would drive these cattle up. But additionally, with all of the influx of new people into the area, with things like the Homestead Act, and now the railroads obviously pushing for other people into the areas too, you're going to have people owning the land, and when it comes down to it, people don't want other people moving through their land. So you're going to get this kind of blocking off of things like barbed wire, around and cordoning off their own land and cordoning off their own grazing land. So this open range that used to exist is going to no longer exist, and it's going to force this transition away from these cowboys to kind of more of a ranch hand that's going to help on these ranches. Additionally, we're going to have
now a large number of people that are coming into this area and trying to try their hand in farming. And this is going to lead to what becomes known as the farmers' Originally, frontier. The Great Plains were actually kind of ignored. They were thought of as what's known as this great American desert, and the reason is that when it comes down to it, you have really no trees. You have all of these different, grasses. There's really not much rain in a large portion of these Great Plains here. You're going to have some seriously harsh weather in the winter and also in the summer, and that's just going to lead to people kind of ignoring it and just using it as a way to get across to some of these mining towns and the mining booms that we were just talking about out west. So this map that you see here is actually kind of a rainfall map. Which is also going to be basically the size and the length of the grasses that you have. So basically what happens is you have the Rocky Mountains kind of right where my mouse is kind of going right now, and as you get the weather moving in from the west, what happens is you get the air that's being forced up these mountains, and in doing so it actually cools off the air, which actually then dumps the liquid that's in the air on what's called the windward side of the mountains. So on the eastern side of the mountains, which is the leeward side, you're going to actually have very little rain. You're going to have very little precipitation on those eastern side of the mountains because of what's called the rain shadow effect of the Rocky Mountains. So this western area of the Great Plains, it's not going to get very much rain when it really comes down to it, and that's going to lead to kind of a shorter grasses here. As you get more toward the middle, you're going to have a little bit longer. You're going to have a little more interaction with the Gulf of Mexico, and that's what leads to some of these big thunderstorms that dumps a good amount of rain, and you're going to get more and more as you head a little bit east. So what's going to happen is that as we now get more states in the Union, and really more in particular after the war, you're going to get what's called the Homestead Act. And the Homestead Act actually going to happen during the war in 1862, but it's going to be the government looking to give away this land. They don't necessarily see it as super productive. They realize that some people are going to want to take advantage of it and have the possibility of creating their own life using it. So to fill up this area, they basically say that anyone who is 21 years old or older that is looking to can get their own homestead. That if they stay on this land for 5 years, then they will be able to keep this land for good. You could actually leave the land for 6 months of the year, but for 6 months you need to be tending to it and working it like it's yours. And you can see this poster here about the free land that was in You Montana. Also have millions of acres of land that are being sold by the railroad companies. Basically what happens is as you have these railroad companies creating these new lines, basically as payment by the government for doing this, you have the land kind of immediately around the railroad lines being given to the railroad companies. So the railroad companies are looking to populate these areas to have some sort of business for themselves, right? If there's a railroad line there, if there are any people to take the railroad lines, around, or to fill it up with goods to ship back around the country, there's not going to be much of a business for these railroad lines, and this is how they are looking to create that business for themselves. So they sell a lot of land around these railroad lines for pretty cheap, and that's basically what this poster is showing. So this free land that these people are getting is more or less a pretty loose term, because the land does require a lot of effort and in some cases a lot of money to really make it usable. So the land itself, for lack of rain, is pretty hard, so breaking into it is very difficult. But you also have these grasses out west that their root systems are as more or less as tall or
taller than the grasses are, at least going down into the ground. So you can see that illustrated here. This is a kind of an illustration of many of the different types of grasses that you're seeing out west. So these root systems, you can cut down the grass, but when it comes down to it, the land is not going to be very usable for growing stuff if you can't dig up and pull out these roots to make the land and the ground, plowable and usable for growing crops. And the railroad is going to become extremely, extremely important for the life out on the plains. This picture right here is actually of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1868. The railroad is going to be really important because it's going to bring in supplies that aren't necessarily out there in the West. In particular, coal is going to be really important. Remember, there's no wood, there's no trees really out west, so the coal is going to be really important for keeping yourselves warm, especially in the winter. The railroad is going to be really important as well for taking out crops. That if you have a farm, you want to sell these crops to market. This is how you're going to get it there. It really encourages movement of peoples out here. It makes it easy, right? These trips that would have taken months, to get out west are now taking a matter of days. So it encourages settlement that way. And as we just mentioned, the railroad is selling land to the settlers. These people out west really had to adapt to kind of a whole new range of problems with living out on the plains. One of the big ones is, we were just mentioning, right, is this lack of trees. There's no trees out west. So initially, these people, in order to build houses, they're essentially have to improvise a bit, and you're actually going to get houses that are more or less completely constructed out of earth. So they're going to kind of dig up this grass and dig up this earth, and they're going to basically build these houses made of sod. And there were some advantages to this, actually. They were pretty good, pretty well insulated, so that in the winter they actually would stay fairly warm. In the summer, it would actually keep the sun out, and it would actually stay cooler relatively to outside. They were pretty wind resistant. They could actually be pretty fire resistant too. They were kind of dark inside, especially if you didn't really have any windows that you were able to build. If it rained, it would actually seep through the ceiling, being as it's dirt. So this is just one of those things that these people had to put up with living out west. So at this time period, in order to stay warm, these women, these people, really, not just women, you have a picture of a woman here and a child, they went around and they collected what are known as buffalo chips and dried cow manure and sunflower stalks and hay and things like that, and they're going to actually burn this for fire because without coal, until you get the railroad lines, people are having a hard time staying warm in the winter. You have some very, very harsh weather out there. So this is just a picture of a woman out in the plains, walking around with her daughter, collecting some of this cow dung or buffalo dung to essentially to keep themselves warm. Also get some serious weather-related issues. You have the interior of the country is really interesting. Basically, in a really quick summary, the center of the country experiences a phenomenon known as continentality, in that land actually heats up and cools down drastically quicker than water. So in the summer, the interior of the continent actually can get very, very hot. And contrast to that, in the winter, it can get very, very cold. So you get both of these extremes, and you actually, as a result, you get some very serious weather. You have some major flooding in certain areas in the spring that they had to deal with. You have this heat and the dryness in the summer that can lead to fires and things like that. The mixing of that cool air and the warm air, in particular in the spring, can lead to some very serious thunderstorms, which lead to then tornadoes as well. And you can have that because, obviously being a major problem for some of these people, that if a tornado comes through, it can destroy everything that you've worked for So I thought years. This was really cool. This is actually the oldest known photograph ever of a tornado that was taken in 1887. So this is happening out west, and it's a big deal for these people. The weather, are something that these people again have to deal with, and these people are really rugged people. You know,
And
they put up with
another
a
one
whole
of
lot.
those things that these people had to deal with are pest problems. You actually have a naturally occurring thing at this time. You have swarms of grasshoppers, and these grasshoppers would swarm in countless numbers, huge numbers, where they would essentially blacken the sky. They would come down. They would and could eat an entire season's worth of crops in just a matter of hours. This is a really interesting cartoon up here that kind of shows some of this, right? You have these swarms of grasshoppers coming down. This is meant to be Topeka, Kansas. You have them kind of eating and taking away all of their loot. You have this man kind of trying to defend himself from the grasshopper here, just as a joke. You have them taking their beans and other things as well. You have this grasshopper filming the whole thing. It's just meant to be kind of a thing showing what this is like for these people. Obviously it's a bit of an exaggeration as far as the cartoon goes, but it's very, very serious, and it can wipe out everything that someone has been working for their entire lives. So as we were saying, before, the West, especially in that rain shadow of the Colorado Rockies, is very dry, and this land, especially in this area, it's not going to be very good for growing anything if you can't water it in some well. And fortunately, this area of the country actually is rich in something known as aquifers. And an aquifer is basically water that is in the ground, and you have these underwater reservoirs in this area known as aquifers, and the big one in particular is this Ogallala aquifer. And people realize that by digging into the ground, you can actually pull up this groundwater that is available in this ground table here, and people develop windmills, and they use them as kind of ways to kind of pump up and bring up this water from the ground to help water the crops and watering the fields in certain cases, and that it's going to help these people to be able to do that. But it's only so much, and they need to develop other techniques as well. They create what is known as dry farming, and this is kind of a method of keeping moisture in the soil. This area is beaten on by sun. The top level of dirt can get pretty hard. So what they would do is they would actually plow deep into the ground. They would kind of water it up. They could kind of tamp down this dirt so that when it basically formed this crust, on top from being sun-baked all day, the water that was kind of put in deep here is going to be locked in this ground more or less, and this is kind of a way that they would able to water this earth here and have it watered effectively for growing crops. You also get the farmers that begin to use this invention known as barbed wire. And this is going to be what we were talking about for as far as fencing in the Great Plains. You're going to have large amounts of this being placed all over the place to hold in livestock, to kind of represent boundaries of different homesteads. And this is what's going to actually block off the movement of the cattle drivers and cattle herders, moving the cattle north, which is going to result in that transition to kind of the more of the ranching mentality instead. So that's it for now. Eventually I'm going to add in the Indian Wars into this video as well, because that is a very important part of this western expansion, and that's going to be next.